This is Rome during one of the strangest periods in its entire history, an era that historians, with remarkable bluntness, actually call the pornocracy. Close your eyes and imagine standing in the Roman Forum in the year 920 AD. You're surrounded by the greatest monuments humanity has ever built, but they're crumbling. Weeds grow between marble columns. The Colosseum looms in the distance, half collapsed. Cattle graze where senators once debated. And from fortified towers built into ancient ruins, rival noble families watch each other with suspicion and hate. This is Rome during one of the strangest periods in its entire history, an era that historians, with remarkable bluntness, actually call the pornocracy. If you visited modern Rome today, you'd see carefully preserved ruins, tour guides, millions of visitors, a city of 3 million people. But in the year 920, Rome's population had collapsed to maybe 30,000. The Pope was essentially a local bishop controlled by powerful families. And the city that once ruled the Mediterranean was now a violent provincial town where power came from whoever controlled the strongest towers and the most loyal thugs. Let's talk about what it was actually like to live in Rome during the pornocracy, a 60-year period from 904 to 964 AD, when the city was controlled not by emperors, not really by popes, but by powerful aristocratic families, and remarkably, by several politically brilliant and ruthless women. The word pornocracy comes from Greek, pornokratia, meaning rule by prostitutes. It's a harsh term coined by later church reformers disgusted by this period. Modern historians prefer saeculum obscurum, the Dark Age, or the rule of the Harlots. These names tell you something important. This was when the papacy became a prize fought over by Roman noble families, and when several women, Theodora the Elder, her daughter Marozia, and Marozia's descendants, wielded more real political power than almost anyone else in Western Europe. So what was Rome actually like? First, the physical city. By 920 AD, Rome had been declining for 500 years. At its peak under Emperor Trajan, Rome held over 1 million people. By 550 AD, maybe 50,000 remained. By the early 900s, possibly as low as 25,000 souls. Where did everyone go? Disease, war, starvation, and infrastructure collapse. Rome's greatness had always depended on its aqueducts. 11 massive aqueducts once brought fresh water from mountains miles away. But starting in 537 AD during a siege, these aqueducts were cut. By 900 AD, most were broken or abandoned. Without reliable water, the population couldn't survive. The massive imperial forums, once the administrative heart of an empire, were now called the Campo Vaccino, the cow field, because locals grazed livestock there. The Palatine Hill, where emperors had built palace after palace, was mostly abandoned. The Colosseum was partially ruined, and local families had built fortifications into its walls. The inhabited parts of Rome clustered near the Tiber River. Narrow medieval streets, wooden houses built against ancient brick walls, markets, churches converted from pagan temples. If you stood on a bridge crossing the Tiber, you'd see a shocking contrast. On one side, a dense medieval town with smoke rising from cooking fires. On the other, endless ruins stretching to the horizon. Now, who controlled this strange, diminished city? By the year 900, the papacy had become a local Roman institution, not really an international power. Popes were elected by Roman clergy and nobles, and those elections were violently contested. Different aristocratic families competed because controlling the Pope meant controlling church lands, church revenues, and political influence across Christian Europe. Into this power vacuum stepped some of the most remarkable figures in Roman history. The first was Theodora the Elder. By 900 AD, she was the wife of Theophylact I, the most powerful secular lord in the city. He controlled papal finances, which made him extraordinarily wealthy. But according to sources, admittedly written by enemies, it was actually Theodora who made the key decisions. Theodora had a daughter named Marozia, and these women, according to the hostile chronicler Lateran of Cremona, didn't just influence politics from behind the scenes, they actively controlled papal appointments, arranged murders, and ran Rome as their personal domain. Here's where it gets complicated. How much is true? Lateran absolutely hated these women. He called them shameless whores and accused them of sexual immorality and corruption. But Lateran was writing decades later with a clear agenda. He wanted to show Rome needed reform. Modern historians are more careful. Yes, Theodora and Marozia were real. Yes, they exercised significant power. But were they prostitutes? Almost certainly not. They were aristocratic women from Rome's most powerful families. The accusations were probably political slander, the standard way medieval writers delegitimized powerful women. What we know for certain, Marozia became one of the most powerful people in Rome. She became involved in the election of at least 4 popes between 914 and 932 AD. One of those popes, John XI, was possibly her son. She married at least 3 times, each marriage a strategic alliance. At her peak, around 932 AD, Marozia held the title Senatrix and effectively ruled Rome from a fortress built into the ancient mausoleum of Hadrian, the same structure we call Castel Sant'Angelo today. Think about that, a woman in 932 ruling Rome from a converted imperial tomb, appointing popes, commanding soldiers, negotiating with kings. This was extraordinary, which is why male chroniclers were so hostile and hostage. But what about ordinary Romans? If you lived in Rome during the pornocracy, your world was small and dangerous. The city had no central government. Different families controlled different neighborhoods, each with fortified towers. These towers were crucial. Built from brick and stone scavenged from ancient ruins, they served as fortresses during frequent street battles between rival clans. As an ordinary Roman, you probably lived in a small house built against an ancient ruin. You used broken pieces of imperial marble as doorsteps. Your cooking fire might be inside what was once a temple to Jupiter. The boundaries between ancient Rome and medieval Rome were blurred, because you literally lived inside the ruins. Water was a constant problem. With most aqueducts broken, you relied on the Tiber River, local wells, or few functioning fountains. The Tiber water wasn't clean. People dumped waste upstream, but you didn't have choices. Food came from the surrounding countryside, increasingly dangerous due to bandits and lawlessness. You ate bread, vegetables, occasional meat if you could afford it, fish from the Tiber. Disease was common. Without proper sanitation or clean water, epidemics swept through regularly. Malaria killed thousands. Religion dominated life. Churches were everywhere, often built inside pagan temples. You'd attend mass, participate in festivals, make pilgrimages. The church provided the only social services, charity, some medical care, education for a tiny elite. But the church itself was compromised. Pope John XII, who became pope in 955 at age 18, was notorious. According to sources, he turned the Lateran Palace into something resembling a brothel, gambled, and hunted. His grandfather was Marozia's son, from the same family network that dominated Rome for decades. Violence was constant. Political disputes were settled with knives, sieges, assassinations. Marozia herself was eventually overthrown by her own son, Alberic II, who imprisoned her and ruled Rome from 932 to 954. His coup involved armed men storming the fortress, fighting through defenders, seizing the city. If you heard fighting in the streets, you barricaded your door and hoped it passed. Yet life went on. People married, had children, worked, prayed. Pilgrims still came to see St. Peter's tomb, bringing money and news. Trade continued, though diminished. Merchants sold grain, oil, wine.
If you were a merchant, you paid protection money to whatever family controlled your neighborhood. The most striking thing was the contrast. You lived surrounded by evidence of a vanished civilization vastly superior to your own. The Pantheon still stood, converted to a church, its massive concrete dome a mystery. How had the ancients built something so large? Nobody in the 10th century knew. Romans lived in the remains of something great. They knew their ancestors ruled the world, but they lived in poverty and violence compared to that lost age. The pornocracy ended in 962. Pope John XII made a catastrophic decision. He invited German King Otto into Italy for help against enemies. Otto came, was crowned Holy Roman Emperor, then turned on the Pope, deposed him, and installed his own candidate. From then on, German emperors claimed the right to control papal elections. Local Roman families lost their monopoly.
But here's what matters. The pornocracy showed that Rome, even in decline, even with 30,000 people, even controlled by local warlords and powerful women, was still Rome. It still mattered. This is why people fought over it, why Marozia schemed for decades, why Otto marched his army over the Alps. And slowly, Rome began to recover. Church reform movements in the late 10th century worked to free the papacy from local control. New religious orders revitalized Christian life. Pilgrimage increased, trade increased, population slowly grew. By 1300, Rome had 90,000 people. By 1600, over 100,000. The Renaissance brought new building, new art, new pride in the classical past. The Rome you see today is the product of centuries recovering from the depths of the pornocracy. But something was lost forever. The Rome of the Caesars, of 1 million people with working aqueducts and professional armies, that Rome died between 400 and 1000 AD. The pornocracy was just one strange chapter in that long death. Yet Romans preserved something. They kept churches functioning, they copied manuscripts, they maintained memory of Roman law, culture, grandeur. The women of the pornocracy, Theodora, Marozia, and others, were products of their time. They used the tools available: marriage, intrigue, control of the papacy, strategic alliances. Were they more corrupt than male nobles before and after? Probably not. They've just been remembered more harshly because they were women who wielded power in ways that male chroniclers uncomfortable. And ordinary Romans? They endured. They raised children in the Colosseum's shadow. They drew water from broken fountains. They prayed in churches built from pagan temples. They lived through the transformation of one civilization into another, the death of the ancient world and birth of medieval Europe. That transformation happened in every European city, but nowhere was it more visible, more dramatic, more loaded with irony than in Rome, the eternal city that nearly died, ruled for a time by women history tried to forget, preserved by people who didn't understand what they were preserving. Rome has fallen, but the scandals continue. Don't miss the next chapter of history's darkest secrets. Click the subscribe button now.